When forensic technicians conducted a digital download of that waterlogged phone, they found something that no one expected. There was a video on the phone, a time-lapse video, and in that video, walking through the frame, going about his business with what appeared to be complete unawareness that he was being recorded, James Brenner, covered in blood, on his arms, on his shirt, cleaning a gun. There is a place in the western edge of Utah that barely qualifies as a town, Lucin. Population, somewhere between 15 and 20 people, depending on the year, depending on who has come and who has gone. It sits on the Utah-Nevada border like something the rest of the country forgot about. Flat, sandy desert stretching out in every direction, the distant outline of the Pilot Range to the west, the vast silence of the Great Basin pressing in from all sides. There are abandoned railroad buildings from the 1800s still standing in the heat. And there is land, dry, stubborn, beautiful land that resists every attempt to make it give something back. This is the place Dylan Rounds chose. Not because he had to, not because he had no other options. He chose it deliberately, with the kind of clarity that most 19-year-olds don't possess yet, because he knew exactly what he wanted his life to look like. He wanted to be a farmer. He had wanted it since he was small. He could drive a tractor before most kids his age knew how to ride a bicycle. He grew up in Idaho surrounded by agricultural land, and he absorbed it, the rhythms of it, the patience it requires, the identity it gives a person. Farming was not a job to Dylan Rounds. It was a calling. In 2019, when he was 16 years old, Dylan and his grandfather pooled their resources and purchased land in Lucin, a piece of the Utah desert that they would spend the next 3 years preparing for actual cultivation. Dylan spent 2 summers clearing it, conditioning it, learning its soil and its seasons. He lived in a camping trailer on the property. He drove 40 minutes to Montello, Nevada when he needed supplies or a meal. He worked late into the nights and early into the mornings, and he did it alone, in a place so remote that the nearest neighbor was miles away, and he did not complain about any of it. The spring of 2022 was the moment everything had been building toward. Dylan Rounds, now 19 years old, was finally ready to plant his first crop. The land was prepared. The seed was in the grain truck. 3 years of work were about to pay off. He never got to see it grow. On the evening of Friday, May 27, 2022, Dylan worked late on his farm getting his seed planted before the rain came in. He was racing the weather the way farmers always do. That ancient, exhausting negotiation with the sky. The next morning, Saturday, May 28th, Dylan called his grandmother. It was a short call, ordinary. He told her it was raining and that he needed to go move his grain truck into the shed so the seed wouldn't get ruined. He said he couldn't talk. He said, "It's raining. I gotta get my seed truck." And he hung up. That was the last time anyone heard Dylan Rounds' voice. By Monday, May 30th, his mother, Candace Cooley, had not been able to reach him. Candace knew her son. She knew that Dylan, however remote his life, however off the grid his existence, would not simply go silent. He always called back. He always checked in. The silence was wrong, and Candace felt it in the specific way that mothers feel when something has happened to their child before anyone can prove it. She drove to Lucin. What she found when she arrived did not bring her relief. It deepened the alarm. Dylan was not there, but things were wrong in ways that were hard to articulate and impossible to ignore. His truck had been power washed. The seats appeared to have been recently moved. Despite the rain that weekend, and there had been rain, Dylan had said so himself, there were no tire tracks on the ground. Someone had cleaned things up. Someone had managed the scene. And then Candace noticed something that cut through every other detail and went straight to her stomach. Dylan's boots were gone, not in the camper, not by the door, gone. Candace Cooley knew her son. She told investigators later, Dylan owned 1 pair of boots. He wore them everywhere. He never went anywhere without them. Those boots and Dylan Rounds were inseparable. She reported him missing that same day. The Box Elder County Sheriff's Office began their investigation. They searched the property. They searched the surrounding desert. Volunteers came, dozens of them, then more, and spent hours in the brutal heat of the Utah West Desert with equipment and hope and growing dread. And in the early stages of the search, something remarkable happened. James Brenner showed up to help look. Brenner was 60 years old, a drifter, a man without a fixed address who had, in recent months, been living in a camping trailer set up on land about 5 miles from Dylan's property. Not his land. not land he had permission to use. He was squatting, occupying a space that wasn't his in the most remote stretch of desert he could find. He and Dylan knew each other. Candace Cooley would later describe Brenner as someone who had at one point lived on Dylan's property, helping him bale hay. Someone who seemed, she said, perfectly ordinary, no reason for alarm. And so James Brenner walked among the search volunteers, spoke to Dylan's parents, suggested places they might look, and told them where he thought Dylan might be. Think about that for a moment. Let it settle. The man who killed Dylan Rounds spent days helping the Rounds family search for their son. He looked Candace Cooley in the face. He offered comfort and ideas. He had been out there in that desert in the weeks before, and he would come back out there and look useful and concerned, and not one word of it was anything other than a performance. Candace Cooley later said, when she learned the full truth, "I can't wrap my head around it. How could he have been out there searching with us, telling us where he thought Dylan might be, conversing with us? There is no good answer to that question. There is only the fact of it." Let me ask you something before we go any further into this case, and I want you to think about it seriously, not just as a true crime question, but as a human one. What does it take to do what James Brenner did? To kill a 19-year-old kid on a rainy Saturday morning and then, days later, stand next to that kid's mother in the desert and help her look for him? What is that person made of? What does that require? And here's the harder question. If someone like that stood next to you right now, would you know? Would anything about them feel wrong? Because Candace Cooley is not a naive person. She is a sharp, determined, fiercely protective mother, and she felt nothing. Nothing at all. That is the most unsettling part of this entire story. Not the crime itself, but how perfectly ordinary evil can look when it needs to. On June 16th, 2022, 18 days after Dylan disappeared, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office and the FBI executed a search warrant on James Brenner's trailer. What they found inside was a collection of ammunition, ignition caps, black powder, and speed loads, all related to muzzle-loading firearms. No gun was discovered in that first search, but the ammunition alone was enough, because Brenner was a convicted felon. He had been convicted in 2012 of being a felon in possession of a firearm and had served 33 months in federal prison. Before that, in the 1980s in Maryland, he had shot another man in a work dispute. The kind of history that doesn't get better over time, the kind that accumulates. For a convicted felon, possessing any of this ammunition was a federal crime. A second search of the trailer, 5 days later, found a rifle with no serial number. Brenner was taken into custody, not for Dylan's murder, not yet, for the firearm charges. He was held in the Weber County Jail while the investigation into Dylan's disappearance continued around him. But before he was arrested, before investigators came back the second time, Brenner had made a move that, when it came out later, told investigators everything they needed to understand about his state of mind. He had gone to a neighbor's house. He brought with him 3 black powder guns and a .22 caliber rifle. He asked the neighbor to hold them for him, to keep them safe. And when the neighbor asked him why, Brenner said he needed to do this for his own safety. He said that the last time he had trouble with the law, they took everything from him, and he did not want to lose what he had left. He was moving evidence before anyone came to get it. That is not the behavior of an innocent man trying to protect his property. That is the behavior of someone who knows exactly what investigators are going to be looking for and is trying to make sure they don't find it. In the weeks and months that followed, the investigation continued. Dylan's phone records were subpoenaed. Cell data showed that his phone had moved through the area on May 28th, and crucially, it showed movement in the same zone where Brenner had been squatting. The last signal from Dylan's phone was traced to a specific location, Lucin Pond, a small body of water near the farm. Investigators searched the pond. They found Dylan's phone at the bottom of it. Now, here is the moment in this case that made national investigators stop what they were doing and pay attention. Because when forensic technicians conducted a digital download of that waterlogged phone, they found something that no one expected, something that should not have been there, something that changed the entire direction of the case. There was a video on the phone, a time-lapse video, the kind you set up to record slowly, a few frames per minute, to capture something over a long period of time. The kind of video that, once started, just keeps recording whether or not anyone intended it to. The time-lapse had been started on the morning of May 28th, approximately 30 minutes after Dylan's last phone call to his grandmother. And in that video, walking through the frame, going about his business with what appeared to be complete unawareness that he was being recorded. James Brenner, covered in blood, on his arms, on his shirt, cleaning a gun. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's easy to hear a detail like that and process it quickly as just another piece of evidence. But think about what actually happened here. A 19-year-old kid is murdered in the desert. His killer takes his phone, maybe to throw it away, maybe to check if there was anything incriminating on it. And in the process of handling that phone, Brenner accidentally hits the wrong button, a wrong swipe, and the phone begins recording. As Dylan's mother Candace would later say, "How did that phone start recording? It has driven us crazy. I'm pretty sure when Brenner took the phone, he just hit the wrong button or had a wrong swipe and had no clue. Then it started recording. The phone then either fell or was thrown into Lucin Pond, and at the bottom of that pond, in cold water, it sat and preserved that footage for investigators to find. Dylan Round's phone recorded his own killer, and then waited in a pond for the people who would eventually understand what it was showing them. When investigators recovered the shirt Brenner was wearing in the video and subjected it to DNA analysis, the results confirmed what the footage already suggested. The blood on that shirt belonged to Dylan Rounds. Now we know something. We know who, we know where. We have a video, we have DNA, we have phone data, placing both men at the same location at the same time. But the investigation still doesn't have what it ultimately needs to close the chapter completely. It doesn't have Dylan. The boots were found on the property, one of them with a blood stain containing DNA from both Dylan and Brenner. But Dylan himself, his body, his remains, they were out there somewhere in the Utah desert, and no search operation could locate them. In October 2022, Box Elder County officials declared the case a homicide investigation. In March 2023, 10 months after Dylan disappeared, James Brenner was formally charged with criminal homicide, aggravated murder, and abuse or desecration of a human body. He remained in custody, still refusing to tell anyone where Dylan was. That silence would last almost 2 full years. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. City, state, country. I want to see how far Dylan's story has reached. And if this is your first time on Close Circle Crime Stories, this is what we do. Every week we go deep on the cases that deserve more light than they've gotten. If that's your kind of content, hit subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference. Somewhere in the spring of 2024, the legal mathematics shifted. Brenner had been sitting in jail for nearly 2 years on the firearm charges, with the murder charge hanging over him. The prosecution was building toward a trial on the aggravated murder count, a first-degree felony that, in Utah, carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison. His defense was navigating a case where the video evidence and the DNA evidence were going to be very difficult to argue against in front of a jury. And Dylan's family had made clear, publicly and privately, that their ultimate goal, beyond any sentence, beyond any verdict, was to bring Dylan home, to find him, to give him a burial, to close the physical absence that had been sitting at the center of their lives for 2 years. A plea deal was negotiated. The terms: Brenner would plead guilty to second-degree murder, a reduced charge, and to 2 counts of possession of a firearm as a restricted person. In exchange, the first-degree aggravated murder charge would be dropped. The desecration of human remains charge would be dismissed. And Brenner would reveal the location of Dylan's remains. On April 9, 2024, James Brenner led law enforcement to a site in the remote western area of Box Elder County, near Lucin. They found skeletal remains in a shallow grave. Dental records confirmed it was Dylan. His mother's statement was brief and devastating. While we had hoped for a different outcome, we have known since the start Dylan was not still alive. This recent development means the investigation has gone full circle, and now we can finally bring Dylan home and close this chapter. He had been 19 years old, living his dream, planting his first crop on his own land. And he had been lying in that grave for 23 months while his family stood in the desert above ground, looking for him. In May 2024, James Brenner appeared in a Brigham City courtroom and entered his plea: guilty to second-degree murder, guilty to the firearms charges. It was also at this hearing that, for the first time publicly, the cause of Dylan's death was officially stated. Dylan Rounds had been shot in the head, Whatever small piece of the world still harbored uncertainty about what had happened on that rainy Saturday morning in the Utah desert, it ended in that courtroom. On July 1, 2024, Judge Brandon Maynard sentenced James Brenner to 1 to 15 years for the murder of Dylan Rounds. He also sentenced him to 2 to 15 years on the firearms charges, with all sentences to run consecutively. Total, 3 to 30 years, mandatory prison time, with the judge advising the parole board to keep him incarcerated as long as possible due to what the court described as his complete lack of empathy. Brenner sat through his sentencing and never turned around to face the Rounds family sitting behind him. Dylan's mother watched him. She had said before the sentencing that she wanted to see his face, to see if it was as cold as everyone described. When he refused to turn around, she said that told her everything. Here's the part of this story that I think deserves its own moment, because it's the part that transforms this from a true crime case into something with real-world consequences that extend beyond Dylan's family. Candace Cooley, in the immediate aftermath of sentencing, made a statement that I think should be heard by every person in the state of Utah, and honestly, by every person anywhere who cares about how the justice system treats the victims of violent crime. She said, "Only 1 to 15 years is for murdering Dylan. The rest is for the gun charges. So constituents of Utah, think about it, and think about who you vote for. These laws are made by our legislature. And if you want them changed, this could be your kid. It could be a man serving more time for having the guns than for murdering your child with them. Let that land." James Brenner, under the plea agreement, is facing a maximum of 15 years for the murder of a 19-year-old boy. He is facing a maximum of 15 years for each of the 2 firearms charges. Sentences running consecutively mean he will serve time for all 3. But the sentencing structure means the guidelines for the guns carry more time than the guidelines for the killing. In Utah, as the law stands today, the mandatory minimum for second-degree murder is 1 year. The mandatory minimum for possession of a firearm as a restricted person is 2 years. James Brenner will serve more mandatory time for carrying weapons he wasn't allowed to have than for the human being whose life he ended. This is not a quirk. This is not an oversight. This is what the law produces when violent crime sentencing has not been updated to reflect what communities actually believe about the value of human life. Candace Cooley is fighting to change it. She founded a nonprofit called Dylan's Legacy, which provides resources and support for families of missing persons and advocates for legislative reform in Utah's sentencing guidelines. She has turned her grief into policy work because she refuses to let Dylan's death be the last word. She wants the law that failed her son to be the thing that changes so it doesn't fail the next family. That is the kind of person Candace Cooley is. And that is, in my view, one of the most important parts of this entire story. Now I want to ask you the question I've been building toward, and I want you to genuinely think about it rather than just react. Was justice served here? Brenner is in prison. Dylan has been found and buried. The killer confessed. The family has some closure, in the limited and incomplete sense that word ever applies to situations like this. By one definition, the system worked, eventually. But here's what I keep coming back to. James Brenner killed a 19-year-old child, a kid who was living alone in the desert trying to grow something, who had never harmed anyone, who had not had the chance yet to become the full version of himself that he was building toward. And the sentence for that, under Utah law as it currently stands, starts at 1 year. 1 year. For Dylan Rounds' entire life. And the reason that number is what it is, the reason the plea deal was structured the way it was, is partly because first-degree aggravated murder was going to be harder to prove at trial than it sounds. The evidence was strong, the video, the DNA, the phone data. But evidence being strong is not the same as a conviction being guaranteed. And prosecutors, facing the reality that Brenner held the only information that could bring Dylan home, had to make a calculation. They chose to bring Dylan home. They chose closure for the family over the possibility of a longer sentence at trial. That is, in many ways, an understandable and even compassionate choice. But it produced an outcome that Candace Cooley described as not justice, not even close to justice. And she is right. There's one more thread in this story that I don't want to leave unaddressed, because it speaks to something about the nature of this crime that I think gets lost in the procedural details: the alleged motive. In an interview, Candace Cooley was told by investigators that James Brenner was, in the words that reached her, mad that Dylan put his truck in the shed that day. That's it. Dylan moved his grain truck into a shed to protect the seed from the rain. The shed was on land near where Brenner was squatting. Whether Brenner felt territorial about the shed, whether there had been some prior tension about access to the property, whether this was the culmination of some slow-burning resentment, none of that has been fully laid out publicly. But the implication is that Dylan Rounds was killed over a parking dispute, over a grain truck moved into a shed on a rainy Saturday morning. He had his whole life ahead of him. He had worked for 3 years to be ready for that first crop. He had built something from nothing in the middle of nowhere because he loved it, because it was his, because it was going to be the foundation of everything he became. And a drifter who had no claim to anything around that property, who was living there illegally, who was barred from owning a single weapon, who had already shot another man in a dispute decades earlier, decided that a truck being parked in the wrong place was worth killing for. There is no framework that makes this make sense. There is no logic that smooths it out. It is just the unbearable, irreducible fact of a young person's life destroyed by someone else's rage over something that mattered not at all. Before I give you my final thoughts, I need to say this directly. Dylan Rounds is not widely known outside of Utah and Idaho. His case had a Dateline segment. It had regional coverage. It had the community of people who found the Missing in America network and followed every update with the kind of invested attention that reflects, I think, the best of what true crime communities can be when they are focused on actually helping rather than just consuming. But nationally, internationally, this case barely registered. There is no documentary. There is no series. There is no cultural moment attached to Dylan's name the way there is for cases with far less compelling facts and far less meaningful outcomes. And I think that's worth naming, because Dylan was a real person who deserved more attention when he was alive and missing, and who deserves more attention now. His family deserved search resources and media pressure and public awareness at a scale that never fully materialized. And the legislative issue that Candace Cooley is fighting, the sentencing disparity that allowed a murderer to be sentenced to less time for the killing than for the weapons, is a real policy problem that affects real families in Utah right now, and it is not getting the coverage it deserves. Here is where I land on all of it. James Brenner is guilty. That is not a question. He confessed. He led investigators to the body. The DNA evidence was overwhelming. The video of him cleaning blood off a gun 30 minutes after Dylan's last phone call was, in the words that prosecutors might use, about as close to a confession as physical evidence can get without being verbal. This case was solved. In that narrow sense, the system worked. But the frame around that resolution is troubling in ways that should not be smoothed over. A convicted violent felon was living illegally on land adjacent to a teenager's farm, in possession of weapons he was legally forbidden to own, and nobody knew about it until after the teenager was dead. The sentencing structure that governed the plea deal gave more mandatory time to the gun violations than to the human life taken. And the family of the victim had to negotiate their son's location out of his killer's silence because that was the only leverage the system had. These are not incidental failures, they are structural ones. They reflect choices that legislatures made or didn't make about what the law prioritizes and what it doesn't. And they have names attached to them, Dylan's name, and the names of every other family that has lived through a version of this. Candace Cooley's work with Dylan's legacy is the right response to a system that produced the wrong outcome. And if this video does anything useful in the world, I hope it is this: that someone watching it somewhere learns the name Dylan Rounds who didn't know it before. That someone in Utah hears what Candace has been saying about sentencing reform and carries it forward. That a 19-year-old kid who just wanted to plant his first crop is remembered as more than a statistic. He deserved his harvest. He deserved to see what that land could produce with someone who loved it taking care of it. He deserved to become the farmer he had been preparing his whole short life to be. He didn't get any of that, but we can at least make sure his name outlasts the silence. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. And tell me, what do you think should happen to the laws that produced a sentence like this? What would justice actually look like for Dylan? I'll read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one.